call to order our committee of the whole. And I ask for the treasurer to call the quorum attendance.
Mr. Craig? Mr. Lindy?
Here, just slow.
Ms. Mapp?
Here.
Dr. Moffat?
Here.
Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Vice President Weinberg? Here. President Bolton?
Present, thank you very much. Real quickly, old board business, we are looking like we will be able to have a fact finding on April 3rd. I think we're still kind of figuring out the time. Madam Superintendent, did you figure out what time might be best for you on
Sure,
that day?
sure. Anytime after 3 is good for
Okay.
me on that day.
So anticipate that, and I think you all received the list as to what it's about. Remember, a fact finding is not for deliberation, not for deciding, but we play the game of you can only ask questions, Kendra. How's about that?
I don't know what happened the first time I tried it. Both of me.
So just one question around the fact finding. Will it be in person or virtual?
It could probably be both. I'd prefer it be in person because it's more fun to slap each other when we don't form a question. But if we need to, if that'll get us a quorum, it would be okay to be both.
Okay.
Remember too, it
Sure.
doesn't have to be, it's not a noticed meeting as such as well. Yes, sir.
Sorry for jumping in. You don't even need a quorum because it's not a meeting.
We have to ask Mr.
Oh, he's not here today.
General Counsel about it. We can do it without. We've done it without,
It's not a meeting.
but I think normally it's not a meeting, but usually we do it with a quorum.
There it is.
I'll let him get seated. You're in trouble already and it's evident you're taking your seat. Mr. Lindy asked the question about a fact finding. Though it's not a noticed meeting as such, do we require a quorum to do business at the fact
It
finding?
was not a question that you can't do business anyway.
Right, can't do business. But we don't need a quorum. If 3 of us came, we could still have it. Okay. Thank you. Cool. So that's, we enjoy those and we get a lot of good information and it helps the administration as well. And it keeps us from doing a lot of additional sorts of things during some of these business meetings. Think you'll enjoy it. Okay, having made that announcement and now gotten a legal ruling and answered a question and determined goodness knows what else, we're ready to start. I think Superintendent, I know that Superintendent had sent us additionally a great document about some budget stuff that she will at least explain the document, but it's not a presentation. We're saving that for Monday evening. But we do have some great goals and guardrails to look at, monitor, and I turn it over to you, Madam Superintendent.
Okay, great. Thank you so much and good evening, everyone, or afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. So today we are looking at goal 1, our 3rd grade reading interims, and goal 2, our 6th grade reading interims. Our next meeting on the 18th, we will be looking at goal 1, 2, and 3, 3rd grade reading, our overall goals for 3rd grade reading, 6th grade reading, and then we'll be looking at our Algebra 1 interims. Next slide. As a reminder, our first goal is to increase our proficiency rate for our 3rd grade students from 47.5% in 3rd grade reading in 23 to 61% in 27. So a couple different data sets for you here, both of which give a very positive picture of the direction that we're going, and we'll move through these as quickly as we can. So our first goal is for all of our 1st grade students. And if we recall with this goal, these are our interims. And so we're looking at these goals in 2 ways. One is by the cohort. So this would be the group that were 1st graders last year. They're 2nd graders this year. The second slide actually compares our last year's 2nd graders to this year's 2nd graders. So we're able to see that data both ways. For our first, this is our cohort where we're looking to increase by the fall to 31%. So our goal for them for this upcoming year is for them to increase to 31%. And last year, this group ended the their first grade year at 32.9%, which was an increase from the fall. They started this year at 20%, and so far they're at 33%. So it shows not only did they increase from the fall to the mid-year, as we would expect, the cohort group also had a slight improvement from last year to this year, from where they ended last year to where they are right now. And from the fall to winter, we see a pretty impressive double-digit gain for the students, and I did want to make sure that we call that out. So this is an area that is on track. Next slide. This particular slide looks at our second grade students compared last year to this year. And I also just want to call this out because we're also seeing the same kind of improvement. So for our second grade students last year, there was a 9 percentage point increase from the fall to the mid-year. And for our second grade students this year, there's a 13 point increase from the fall to the winter. So still seeing the same kind of improvement. Next slide. All of this is referencing reading. Now we go into our demographics. This specifically is for our Black students. We do see an increase from the fall to the winter for this year of 13%, 13 points. So that's a double-digit increase as well. And we see a slight increase for the cohort also. So where they ended the cohort in the winter and where they are right now in the winter as well. And that's another improvement for them, for our Black students. Next slide. Now we're looking at our Hispanic students. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the end. While we're still seeing the increase, we are still very concerned about the percentage of our students, especially in our Hispanic population, that are not on grade level. And so when we look at that, we are seeing a slight increase from the winter last year to the winter this year, an increase from the fall to the winter for the students this year as well, but not seeing the same kind of growth within that particular cohort group as we're seeing in some of the other areas. So we will continue with the work that we're doing through that and talk a little bit more about that as we get to overall next steps. The same remains true as we look at our, where we see the Hispanic students meeting the success criteria as well. Same kind of storyline. We do see improvement from the fall to the winter for our second grade students last year, and we see improvement this year, but we're still seeing the same kind of trends. One of the things, we're still seeing the same kind of noticings in terms of the overall numbers for our students that were second graders last year and the second graders this year, even though we do see an improvement. So I'll stop here so we can do takeaways and next steps, and then I'll open up for questions. I referenced this as we were going through the data, just looking at those numbers. The double-digit gains, I think, is what stands out as we think about where we are in the fall to where we are in the winter. And that was for most of our student groups. The other thing that I do want to call out is for many of our areas, our students have already surpassed the fall to winter gains across the student groups. And that's relevant because it's also sharing with us that where our students end in the mid-year and where they pick up at the beginning of the school year, we're going to see a decline because the expectations are different. But they're also seeing the improvement overall as we're looking at the student groups. Winter over winter gains for all of the student groups, other than multiracial and special education, is where we really see the biggest number of improvement. And for the cohort, there's a slight year-over-year gain as well as we think about the cohort group. So of course, we want to continue to see the improvement. We want the cohort group. We want to be able to see if you're a first grader, when you get to second grade, you're still showing a level of improvement. And I really do believe that the kind of improvement for the students with greater expectations is really, really strong. In terms of next steps, the next steps are still the same. We're continuing to focus on Tier 1 instruction. We are continuing to do our deep dives with our data around iReady that is happening across our grade bands. And I think, again, one of the most important things about that is it is giving teachers actionable data that they're able to use in classrooms with students around where student deficits are. And our students are also able to use MyPath as well, the additional resources in terms of working with that. And continuing to review growth data for students. As those have seen that have visited schools with me, talking to the students regardless of the grade level, they can tell you something about their improvement, where they are and what their goals are. So that's just it's a feel good to call out because the more the students own their data, the more improvement we will see with them. So I'll stop there and open up for questions.
Questions, comments for board members? Ms. Mapp?
Thank you, Superintendent Wright, for this presentation. I'm glad to see that we are recognizing that there's gains within the data. I am curious to know where we are in terms of like maybe a snapshot with our current third graders, with their assessments in terms of like the OST and maybe how that aligns to where they were in comparison to their iReady scores, because I know they have already taken like a fall assessment, correct?
Right, so the goal for next time, the 18th, actually covers the third grade students, I believe is in that particular
Okay.
one. But what I will share is our students for third grade are continuing to trend up. Like we have schools right now where the schools have already surpassed where they ended in the spring in terms of their data. And through our lead conversations, we do lead sessions after each major data set. That was one of the celebrations across schools, because the schools have really begun to use the data and analyze it, and they're able to look at the trend information as well. And so that's one we'll look forward to sharing at the board meeting on Monday.
Okay, well, I'm glad that I asked it because I'm hoping that I'll be here. I'll be traveling back into town, so I'm hoping I'm here. And just a few more questions, as it pertains to like the OST. So I know that students that may not be where they should be in terms of proficiency, there's a possibility that they would have a REMP plan, right? A reading improvement monitoring plan.
That's right.
How early can a student be identified if they're not showing level of proficiency, excuse me, with their reading scores?
You actually start with them, whether they're on track or off track at kindergarten.
Okay.
So you start looking at them really early, and begin to do interventions with them. And the requirements come after that, but our focus has been starting with them as early as possible. We're really beginning to dig more into our early childhood data, because when we think about our overall report card, that was one of the areas that we were 2 students away from having that as a 2.5. And so we really were able to dig into that space. And what we're seeing in the data, really beginning to talk about how we're utilizing that in the schools. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of thinking about the early childhood data, and this really came out through our lead conversations, is there is not necessarily alignment across the board on what we're using in terms of the assessment with the students. And so what we are focused on as a next step is making sure that that alignment is in place so that as we're comparing across our schools for our students, we're using the same resources to do that. And even starting at pre-K. So we're doing that with our kindergarten students, but with pre-K, and being able to project where they are in terms of kindergarten readiness, different assessments are happening with those. So we're really excited about aligning around that.
Perfect, thank you, because that was my next question, so look, you're on it.
Thank you.
My last question is, and anyone could possibly chime in on this, but I know that with our reading assessment for our third grade students, it is really critical because it determines whether they are retained or whether they move forward for, and matriculate into 4th grade. Has the state is there still conversation around that? Because I know that it was a possibility that they may not move forward with, I guess, upholding whether a student is retained or not. So I'm just looking for clarity around that. Have we?
Yes, so if our third grade students, we had a decision to make last year. And the decision last year was whether or not our students would promote. It wasn't an automatic retention, as had been talked about before. So we had to make a decision as to whether or not our students would promote or whether they would move forward and do additional interventions. The parents have to be notified of that, and a parent can say whether or not they want their child to promote or not to promote if they don't have a promotable score. So one of the things that happens with that is there are a lot of different opportunities for students to get that. October, they could get a promotable score from iReady. There's an opportunity for them to get a promotable score from OST, and they can test again in the summer to get a promotable score. And so that allows them to move without any intervention. For us, we made the determination that we believe that it was best collectively for our students to be able to move forward and continue to do interventions for them. So that's one of the reasons that for the summer, as we talked about, the groups that we would be looking at, third grade students that don't have a promotable score is one of those groups.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments from board members? Mr. Lindy?
Thank you, President Bolton. I will sometime this afternoon get my microphone to, I will push the button correctly. I apologize. I just had one comment and then one question. I think the comment was, this feels like a lot of really good progress. And it's coming in the context of this article that I'm going to continue to carry around and hold up at every board meeting, and for a while, that says that we have the second highest improving math scores in the country among major urban school systems. And so it is wonderful to see that we don't just have fantastic progress happening in math, we have some great progress happening in reading. And I think that, the core of what any school district should be about, this is just my perspective, should be about improving academic outcomes for children. There's been a lot of people doing a lot of hard work over the last several years. Our teachers, our administrators, our superintendent, my colleagues on the board. And it's just, it doesn't always happen that you try really hard and the universe responds with good results. But it's really nice when it does. And then so I think my question was going to be, and I don't know that I heard this in the earlier discussion. If I missed it, I apologize. But could you just talk a little bit about what you think is behind the why? Like why are the scores improving? If there are lessons to learn that could be, applied in the future, that feels like a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think that there are a combination of things. I think the first, and I know that everyone's heard me say this pretty often, but I think the first is the focus on Tier 1 instruction, making certain that our students are getting grade level materials and grade level resources. Our district purchased very highly aligned resources before I came to the district. And what we've really done is spent a lot of time around usage of those resources. That was one of the concerns from the board. I think actually President Bolton was one that raised that as a concern. We spend a lot on curriculum, but we're not necessarily hearing that the curriculum is being used in classrooms. And so we've spent a lot of time around the usage of the curriculum. I think the second is helping teachers and school leaders to really understand the data and the data sets and how they are able to provide additional Tier 2 support in terms of that. So what are the additional gaps that students have that they're able to continue to work on? So we do have reading specialists that are in our buildings, and many of them, all of our Title I K-8 schools and high schools for right now. And in terms of that, they work with a core group of students as well, but they're working with them a lot of times around those individual strategies. I think that's the second. I think the third, and this comes from just moving through the process quite a bit. The third is really getting to the student level of ownership for their data. We're finding that a lot of our students are just really excited. There have been some that have not been as excited because one of the things that the resource is doing for them is identifying specifically where the disconnects are. And if there has never been anything to do that, that's uncomfortable for a parent more than sometimes for a child. So helping them to really understand where those disconnects are. This is a research-based tool. And so we're also really supporting the schools around the research that goes along with it. 75% accuracy twice a week in terms of the number of lessons that you're doing. And the scores are diagnostic and prescriptive. So as students are doing those assessments, they find that as they're going through improvement, when they get to the next level of assessment, they do see the improvement that we intend.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. It's just one follow-up. I think for people who spend a lot of time in education, you hear Tier 1 instruction and you know exactly what that is. And I don't see anybody in the audience from the media, but in case anybody is watching this or either now or later, as I understand Tier 1 instruction, this is about getting the basics right.
That's correct.
It's easy to talk about, we need to add this or do this new fancy thing or increase this or add things to this. This is about the basic things of what happens in a period or the literacy block in the morning when the teacher is delivering instruction to all of the kids.
That's correct. So it's about two things. It's one about the instructional time between the teacher and the student that is not remedial in nature. Because one of the things that the research also says is that students that are not proficient readers or proficient math students, they need proficient work in order for them to reach the level of expectation. So they have to be presented with the grade level work. And then after that happens and they're exposed to that, there are scaffolds that teachers use for that. But after that, then you go into their individual skill deficits so that you're able to work with them on their individual skills so that they're improving overall. One of the things that happens a lot of times when students are not where they need to be is that we want to remediate them out of the challenge that they have. And you cannot remediate students into proficiency. We have to expose them to grade level context.
Any other comments, questions? I will make one on the tier one piece. I think one of the more controversial things that the superintendent did, and we backed her in doing it last year, a year before, sort of, the years are blending together, was the emphasis when we were in that teacher shortage piece of moving teachers that were doing particular things back into the classroom and indeed calling them tier one teachers. It's very important, and having been on this board for 16 years, there are boards along the way that emphasize the fact that it's great to talk about outcomes, but it's also important to build an actual educational system that is not based on remediation, but instead on teaching and learning. And we fall into the pit if we get we need a lot of remediation. We need lots of special support. Not everybody's important, but educational communities spend time on tier one, on tier one. And I think that it's important for us to be pleased with that. And if that's having a benefit, that's great. Yeah, for really. Any other, then move ahead then.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so our goal 2 is looking at the reading proficiency between our 6th grade Black students, Hispanic, and multiracial students. And our goal here is to shrink the gap between the students. And so initially, we're looking at shrinking that gap by about 20%. We have a ways to go, but we do want to share where we are in the data. So let's go to the next. So when we look at our multiracial students in reading, and this is 4th grade, so this is the same kind of concept as we're thinking about where we were looking to be in terms of our 6th grade students. So the goal is about 6th grade, but we started this work by looking at 4th grade. That same population is 5th grade this year, so we're doing the same thing, cohort to cohort, and then we'll look at grade level to grade level. So for our multiracial students, we see that in the students ended in the winter at 50%. And this winter, the population is at 57.2%. So looking at just that cohort, the improvement, yes, there's improvement. And we expect improvement from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. That's just an overall expectation. But it is relevant to also see that there's a 7-point increase for that cohort group as well, because that speaks to progress and gain. So we do believe this is an area that is on target. Next slide. The next slide takes us to our multiracial students. And as we're looking at the multiracial students, we also see an increase. One to call out as well for the winter, the multiracial, this was our 5th grade group. So there was an increase from the fall to the winter for 5th grade for the same population last year at 3.2%. But this is something that I want us to pay close note to. Our 5th grade students this year started at 55%. So when we think about the starting place for the 5th grade students and where the 5th grade students started in the fall last year, there is a difference of almost 20 points. So that again is relevant and also speaks to how we anticipate continuing to see improvement when we're really working in the inner spaces as we get started. So increase for the students from 55% to 57% from the fall to the winter for our 5th grade students, but still on target. But did want to call that one out specifically. Next slide. This is our 4th grade Black students. This was for last year. So the same population is now 5th grade students. Same kind of story here. For our 4th graders, they ended at 27%. The winter where they are right now is at 34.6%. So that's an increase from the winter last year for the cohort to now. And there's also an increase, of course, from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. The other thing that we want to acknowledge here, even though we know ultimately our target is to look at OST, the fact that this population for the winter is already performing at 35%, and that's one of our ending target goals. We're really hopeful to see where our students end up as we are continuing to move through next school year. So we're looking to surpass that one next year. Next slide. Same thing. This is for fifth grade, our fifth grade students last year as compared to fifth grade students this year. And we are seeing the same kind of increase where we are looking at where the students started at the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, there was a 1.7% increase. And for this year, there was a 3.4% increase. So still seeing the increase, whether we're looking at cohorts or we're looking at the fifth grade population compared to the fifth grade population. Still on track. For our Hispanic students, we're seeing the same increase, of course, from the fall to the winter of 4.3. And again, the cohort group for fourth grade ended at 21. Well, at the middle of the year last year, they were at 21. And right now at the middle of the year, they're at 27.8. So continuing to see that progress. We recognize that this is also still a population for us to continue to focus on, but do want to make sure that we are acknowledging that we're seeing improvement and growth. Next slide. Same thing, the same information. This was just fifth grade to fifth grade. And again, almost the same for this group. Our fifth graders last year started at 24.8%. Our fifth graders this year for our Hispanic population started at 24, right around 24%. And at the winter last year, they were at 27.1. And at the winter this year, our fifth graders are at 27.8. So there's been a greater increase from the beginning of the year to where we are right now, but the numbers are relatively the same. Next slide. So if we'll go back one slide. I also want to call out here, and I didn't do this on the other slides, but I do want to make sure that I acknowledge where all of the students were. We'll go back one slide more. That I acknowledge where all the students were. So here we are seeing for our fourth grade population, well, overall for our fourth grade population that's now fifth grade students, we're seeing an increase with the students from the beginning of the year to where they are right now for all students as well. So I referenced that at the end of the other presentation, but as we go through the change for each of our demographic areas for our current fifth grade students, we see that we have improvement. If we go back to goal 1, just real quick. Right here. If we look here, some very obvious things to call out that I did not call out to start with, but I do want to make sure that I do. I called out the double-digit increases, but when we look at where those numbers are, for all of our students, 13.6% in terms of increase from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year as compared to for all students, 9.7 for last year. So just wanted to call that out. If we'll go to the last slide, the storyline, honestly, here is what right there is the same. It's the same story in that we are, continuing to work on tier 1. We're continuing to engage around the acceleration and the expectation of what those things look like. We see that our Black and multiracial student results are right at their target for 2025. And I do think that's important, for us to call out as well. But when we look at the key takeaways and the next steps, this slide and the slide for goal 1 are essentially the same information because the way that we're doing the work and the progress is the same. So I'll stop here if there are questions.
Comments? Excuse me, Chairman Craig.
So just a couple, 2 real quick thoughts here. And first is around the, around where most of the students were starting at a different level when we look at the cohort view from their 4th grade to their 5th grade. And so I think it's important to note, though, that the one area where we still see a little bit of that not necessarily happening, that growth from last winter to the start of the fall, was with our Hispanic population in the same way. And so I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts in general around kind of efforts that we might want to be thinking about, because at that 4th to 5th grade vantage point, we're seeing such growth from other groups and other demographic groups.
So I think there are a couple of different things. One of the things, if you recall, one of the roles that we added last year, specifically for our Hispanic, for our multilingual population was the ELL coordinator. Because what we find is that there's a lot of support that's needed in the school building. And so we looked at schools that had 20% or higher multilingual families, so that we had someone in the building that really could be a conduit between what they needed in the school and what was happening at home. So really looking at those wraparound services and support. I think the second thing that we are continuing to look at, and it's something that, we're going to need to really talk about even more, is, and there are different schools of thought on it, and I've said this before, but how we're working with our newcomers. Because when we look at where our populations are, it's right around older elementary and high school where our students are coming in. So even though we have an increase across the district of the number of multilingual families that we have, when we concentrate where those students are, we see a lot of students entering at the upper grades for elementary and at the high school level. So really how we're looking at that support. The other thing that we are continuing to work through is how we are preparing our teachers for the necessary professional development and working with the students that have the diversity of languages. So we have our ELL teachers that are in classrooms with our students and providing services, but we're really needing to dig deeper with our general ed teachers. So we're increasing our SIOP training for the teachers as well. SIOP is really, they're just good strategies for all students, but they're identifiable strategies for really working with our multilingual families. And so those are just a few areas that we're focused on. The other thing that we have begun to look at as well is how we may use peer support in schools for students that are not necessarily where they need to be, but they have peers that can do the peer-to-peer support with them to also help with those overall improvement strategies.
Yeah, and I think the second kind of more comment than the question though is recognizing that I think some of the struggles that we're going to see that you were kind of speaking to already was that we have students who enter in to our district at different times, different levels, who get different support when they get home, right? And different levels of their connection with others. And so I think things like the peers who can help them or other folks who can help them throughout their day outside of just what they do in a classroom may also be helping grow some of those numbers, because we do recognize that as you get to the higher grade you get, the more important is your ability to be able to comprehend information for all subject matters. So if you're struggling with reading at 6th grade and 7th grade, you're also likely to struggle in math, you're likely to struggle in science, likely to struggle in social studies. And so we want to make sure that that's something it's good to see that we're growing, but it's hopeful that we'll see more growth with some of our most vulnerable students.
I think the two things that I would add to that, one is we have our SLIFE programs that work with our students that have very limited, very, very basic English skills. And so that's one population. And what we find is many of those students were not proficient in their home language. And so we're working to get them proficient in English when they're not proficient in their home language. So that's one. I think the second is there was an initiative that we did last summer where we went to homes, and most board members would likely remember this, where we went purposely to families, to homes of our ELL families. And the decodables that we actually gave them had had codes on the back, QR codes, where the students got a lesson, and they were by grade level, but they got a lesson in English and a lesson in Spanish. So not only did we find from the feedback that it helps the student, but it helped everyone in the family, because oftentimes in the family is not proficient in English. So it was just another way to offer some additional support. And we worked with community partners, because there wasn't always a comfort with us going to the homes. So they would come to the libraries, or they would go to, the resource center as well, and allow us to work with them.
Questions, comments? Map? Yeah, we need to
Just one
move
final
on. Our
question.
superintendent likes to share lots of information.
This is the
I
work.
know, I
This is
know,
the
you
real
love it.
work.
I love it too. Go ahead.
I'll make it brief. I'm just thinking about, again, with the reading scores, the reading goal. So I know that writing is integrated within the reading OSC, correct? Have we been able to identify if the writing is presenting a challenge for our students as well? Or is it just, maybe the reading comprehension, like what, I don't know, what?
I think in terms of the disaggregation, the way that we've looked at it, it could be a combination. However, there are options within the writing that is still fairly formulaic. So a lot of our schools, one of the resources or the strategies that they use is a painted essay because it really teaches the students the structure of what it is that they're looking at. What we are beginning to really continue to promote and talk about even more regularly is most of the reading on the state assessment is not just about literature or reading a story and answering the questions. Where you really get deep work around those things is in your content areas. So what you're doing in science, what the lessons are around social studies, and how you're bringing that in terms of the comprehension. So continuing to really make sure that we're teaching all of the content across grade levels so that as our students continue to move on, I think I heard President Bolton reference something a moment ago about not being able to continue to do intervention. It's just like we think about, you can't exercise your way out of a poor diet. So it's the same thing. We can't wait until it's fifth grade and students need to take the science assessment to begin to prepare them for that. That's why we have strong curriculum starting at kindergarten, and teachers are buying into it, and we're seeing it as we're going in classrooms this year. So the writing is integrated right now. I don't know that we've seen as much that's causing the disconnect between the proficiency level.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for asking the question about writing. I think that's so crucial. I know the suburbs spend a lot more time on writing than we've often are able to do, and I think that's a great question. Next, we good? Any other items?
That was the last thing for this, if you want me to walk through the.
If you'll just explain to us
Sure.
the document, and then we'll recess.
Sure. So the document that I share is just a brief update around budget. And again, continuing to look at our best thinking around that. It will continue to change as we go through continuing to look at the work that we're doing. So if you go to the next slide, this is information that you have access to already. At the bottom, the choices document remains there. So if we go to the next and you click the choices, that's where we're updating our information. The other thing that I shared with you, if we'll keep moving down some of this was to give more, if we'll keep going, please. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
I like
One more
it when you
time.
do that. That's great.
Right, next one. Okay, so this was responsive to questions that we had from the last time as we're preparing to revisit some of those things possibly this week. So one was around transportation. There were questions around that, the numbers, so forth and so on. What we've done with transportation, and you'll see it in the choices document, what we've shown where there is an option to decrease transportation by about $13 million. So, but it's tough decisions, but the information is there. So if we go to the next slide, this slide actually tells us right now the differences in the walk zones. That was one of the questions that we had in terms of what those distances were. The chart over to the right, this is the order in which they were ranked from the survey. So that's what those numbers mean on the side. And we'll keep going. This just gives a little more information on that. The one thing that I do want to call out as we're thinking about our options is currently we have 1,128 7th and 8th graders that ride Metro right now. So let's go to the next. The next one is our resource coordinator information as we're looking at some opportunities and options. This gave the breakdown of the structure. Next slide. Next slide. And where we could go in terms of reduction in cost if we were able to go to 33 positions versus every school having a position right now. So we do believe that we have a way, I'm looking at my partner over here. We do believe that once we get to Monday, if this is something that we can support, we do have a way that we would be able to fund that. That is not a part of general fund. So, but it would take us going to the 33 positions, which is essentially position shared between schools, and working in partnership with the lead agencies. Next slide. The last was the nursing options. President Bolton asked us to include some information here from before, and that's what this information is that was shared during our work session. Next slide. One more. One more. One more. Back up, please. Okay, one more. This one is on I think that there was not complete clarity based on some of the questions that I received about what we were proposing for the change in nurses, but this explains again what that was. So we were not proposing eliminating nurses. We were proposing reducing that amount by $1 million, and this is how we got to that number. Final slide. Paraprofessionals, to break that down just a little bit more, that came up in our last conversation. There was at least one question around clarity for that. And so this explains the breakdown for that. If we'll go to the next slide. The thing that's important to call out here is of our current 72 FTEs, and I'm going to honor Ms. Bell and not call them operational paras anymore because they are not, but of the 72 FTEs that we have, 54 of them are filled currently, not 72. So 18 are vacant. Of those, when we think about projections for next year, we are still projecting a large number of vacancies in terms of paras just with what we have right now. So if there was a reduction with those 72, the 54 people that are left would have a place within those spaces. So just wanted to clarify that as well. And I think that that was all that I had in terms of clarifications.
Appreciate that. If there's any questions or comments about that document, we're going to be working on Monday through some more budget, obviously material, and we appreciate having this at an early time. We'll be working through some more ad hoc issues as well, have new policies also to adopt, and also our guest from our president of OSBA. So it's going to be a big night, but I think we can do things expeditiously. And I think that'll be great. And it's good to have the information ahead of time. If there's no other questions or comments about right now, we'll entertain a motion to go into recess into executive session for the purposes of employment of public official or employee pending imminent court action and sale of property at competitive bidding. Do I have a motion and a second from someone?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Treasurer?
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Ms. Mapp,
Yes.
Dr. Moffett.
Yes.
Mr. Morosky.
Yes.
Vice President Weinberg.
Yes.
President Bolton.
Yes, and we'll now recess. And we're going to come back into public session, but without any work to do.